anyone even suspecting you were gone. But on the other hand, Lyad admitted fairly, your double might be caught immediately or within minutes. She would not be conscious then, and I doubt your fierce little commissioner would go to the unethical limits of dead-braining a live woman. If he did, of course, he would learn nothing from her. Let's assume, nevertheless, that for one reason and another your friends suspect me immediately, and only me. At the time you were being taken from the dome, I was observed leaving the Grand Commerce Center. I'd shopped rather freely. A number of fairly large crates and so forth were loaded into my speedboat, and we were observed returning to the Aurora. Not bad, Trigger admitted. Another facsimile, I suppose. Of course. The Ermetyne glanced at a small jeweled wristwatch. Now, the Aurora, if my orders were being followed, and they were, dived approximately 5 minutes ago. Unless somebody who might be your wrathful rescuers approached her before that time. In which case, she dived then. In either case, the dive was seen by the Commissioner's watchers, and the proper conclusion, sooner or later, will be drawn from that. Suppose they dive after her and run her down, Trigger said. They might. The Aurora is not an easy ship to run down in subspace, but they might. After some hours. It would be of no consequence at all, would it? The Amber's eyes regarded Trigger with very little expression for a moment. How many hours or minutes do you think you could hold out here, Trigger Argee, if it became necessary to put on real pressure? I don't know, Trigger admitted. She moistened her lips. I could give you a rather close estimate, I think, the Ermetyne said. But forgive me for bringing up that matter. It was an unnecessary discourtesy. Let's assume instead that the rather clever people with whom you've been working are quite clever enough to see through all these little maneuverings. Let's assume further that they are even able to conclude immediately where you and I must be at the moment. We are, as it happens, on the Griffin, which is Belchik Pluly's outsized yacht, and which is orbiting Manon at the present. This room is on a sealed level of the yacht, where Belchik's private life normally goes on undisturbed. I persuaded him 2 days ago to clear out this section of it for my own use. There is only one portal entry to the level, and that entry is locked and heavily guarded at the moment. There are 2 portal exits. One of them opens into a special lock in which there is a small speedboat of mine, prepared to leave. It's a very fast boat. If there have been faster ones built in the hub, I haven't heard of them yet. And it can dive directly from the lock. She smiled at Trigger. You have the picture now, haven't you? If your friends decide to board the Griffin, they'll be able to do it without too much argument. After all, we don't want to be blown up accidentally. But they'll have quite a time working their way into this level. If a boarding party is reported, we'll all just quietly go away together with no fuss or hurry. I guarantee that no one is going to trace or overtake that boat. You see? Yes, Trigger said disconsolately, slumping back a little. Her right hand dropped to her lap. Well, she thought, last chance. Dr. Vitonia frowned. First, he began. Trigger slapped the porgee pouch, and the Denton's soundless blast slammed the talented investigator back and over in his chair. Gun, Trigger explained unnecessarily. The Ermetyne's face had turned white with shock. She flicked a glance down at the man, then looked back at Trigger. There are guns on me too, I imagine, Trigger said, but this one goes off very easily, First Lady. It would hardly take any jolt at all. Lyad nodded slightly. They're no fools. They won't risk shooting. Don't worry. Her voice was careful but quite even. A tough cookie, as the Commissioner had remarked. We won't bother about them at the moment, Trigger said. Let's stand up together. They stood up. We'll stay about 5 feet apart, Trigger went on. I don't know if you're the gun-grabbing type. The Ermetyne almost smiled. I'm not, she said. No point in taking chances, Trigger said. 5 feet. She gave Dr. Vitonia a quick glance. He did look to be very unpleasantly dead. We'll go over to that ComWeb in a moment, she told Lyad. I imagine you wouldn't have left it on open circuit. Lyad shook her head. Calls go through the ship's communication office. Your own people on duty there? No, Pluly's. Will they take your orders? Certainly. Can they listen in? Trigger asked. Not if we seal the set here. Trigger nodded. You'll do the talking, she said. I'll give you Commissioner Tate's personal number. Tell them to dial it. The pre-call transmitters pick up ComWeb circuits. Switch on the screen after the call is in. He'll want to see me. When he comes on, just tell him what's happened, where we are, what the layout is. He's to come over with a squad to get us. I won't say much, if anything. I'll just keep the gun on you. If there's any fumble, we both get it. There won't be any fumble, Trigger, Lyad said. All right, let's set up the rest of it before we move. After the commissioner signs off, he'll be up here in 3 minutes flat or less. How about the ship's officers? Do they take your orders too? With the obvious exception of yourself, Lyad said. Everyone on the Griffin takes my orders at the moment. Then just tell whoever's in charge of the yacht to let the squad in before there's any shooting. The commissioner can get awfully short-tempered. Then get the guards away from that entry portal. That's for their own good. The Ermetyne nodded. Will do. All right. That covers it, I think. They looked at each other for a moment. With the information you got from Balmorden, Trigger remarked, you should still be able to make a very good dicker with the Council, First Lady. I understand they're eager to get the plasmoid mess straightened out quietly. Lyad lifted one shoulder in a brief shrug. Perhaps, she said. Let's move, said Trigger. They walked toward the ComWeb rather edgily. Not very fast, not very slow. Trigger 4 or 5 steps behind. There had been no sound from the walls and no other sign of what must be a very considerable excitement nearby. Trigger's spine kept tingling. A needle beam and a good marksman could pluck away the Denton and her hand along with it without much real risk to the Ermetyne. But probably even the smallest of risks was more than the Tranest people would be willing to take when the First Lady's person was involved. Lyad reached the ComWeb and stopped. Trigger stopped too, 5 feet away. Go ahead, she said quietly. Lyad turned to face her. Let me make one last, well, call it an appeal, she said. Don't be an over-ethical fool, Trigger Argee. The arrangement I've planned will do no harm to anybody. Come in with me and you can write your own ticket for the rest of your life. No ticket, Trigger said. She waggled the Denton slightly. Go ahead. You can talk to the Council later. Lyad shrugged resignedly, turned again, and reached toward the ComWeb. Trigger might have relaxed just a trifle at that moment, or perhaps there was some other cue that Pilli could pick up. There came no sound from the ceiling canopy. What she caught was a sense of something moving above her. Then the great golden bulk landed with a terrifying lightness on the thick carpet between Lyad and herself. The eyeless nightmare head wasn't 3 feet from her own. The lights in the room went out. Trigger flung herself backwards, rolled 6 feet to one side, stood up, backed away, and stopped again. End of chapter 21.